Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You are entering into the combat zone. I'm Joe, he's Nick, and this is the place where the enemy only has one of four things to say. Bail out, abandon ship, take cover, and we surrender.
I am so proud of you.
Well, I read it off my script.
I wasn't going to say that.
I'm nothing if not honest, Nick.
Well, that's true, and that's what we like about you, Joseph. No,
amongst,
that was
amongst
flawless.
many other things. Amongst many other things, Nick.
That's right. That's right. That's only one of the many things we love about Joseph.
Yes.
All right. Well, you know what?
Okay, no time to waste. Oh, you're laughing already, Nick.
I know,
we only
because
just started.
what a good talk show host does in the last few minutes before the show is he plays Spider Solitaire. Actually, no, he doesn't. Excuse me. I was looking at Twitter, and a friend of ours, Jay, posted a short little, you know how they have those little Twitter clips or whatever they call them.
Okay.
They're like 30 seconds of something that's happened. So you don't get any context. All you get is just the action. And there's this ram, a sheep, and it's got to weigh 150 pounds. And it's downtown in this city. And this rather large lady sees it coming and takes her hand and tries to bat it away. Well, the one thing you don't do is take on a ram, goat or sheep or otherwise, in and around the head, because that's how they fight. They butt heads. Okay? So the goat knocks her over. Well, a man comes to her rescue, which I laud the guy for. But he comes to her rescue, and he kicks it in the head and all that stuff, and that's all great. Okay? But again, you don't attack it at the head. You don't go after it at the head. If you do, you go for the very end of the nose, where it's often sensitive. Okay? And you never turn your back on it, and you never back down. Because if you do, then they automatically assume you're beneath them in the herd, and they get to boss you around. It's herd instinct. This poor guy, he's doing his best, having never dealt with livestock before. He doesn't know what he's doing. And the goat is chasing him around this little tree. And I just biting my lip, because you're getting ready for the show and you're doing your technical stuff, and I don't want to interrupt what you're doing. But oh my God, it was funny. Just hilarious. Anyway, that has nothing to do with anything at all. Excuse me.
Nick was looking for his kill switch.
I didn't know which one was which, so I had to press them both.
Yeah, that's probably the best thing to do, because these mics are still kind of sensitive, even though they're supposed to be only one direction.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether you've noticed or not, Nick, but my when you kill your mic and cough, my mic picks it up. Now, it's muted. It's not as loud as it could be, for sure, but it still picks it up. Anyway, That's what happens when you're doing live radio, guys.
That's the beauty of live radio.
It is.
It's raw.
It is part of our charm.
And we are. If we're nothing, we're not. If we're not charming, we're not nothing.
You need to rehearse that line, Nick.
I don't know. I kind of like it. Anyway,
if we're not charming, we're not nothing.
That's right. Hey, listen, that's as much fun to say as
you guys out there better be listening. You guys.
That's right. You better always be paying attention.
Okay, on with the show, Nick.
Okay, on a much more serious note. We have a situation in the last few days, and I wrote a piece about this, and I put it up on the Combat Facebook page, and it's about my understanding. Now, I am no clinical psychologist. I'm no Dr. Peterson. You know, there's a long list of things I'm not. I'm no mental health professional. I'm just a layman looking at the circumstances, scratching my head and saying, why? Now, what I'm talking about is there was a shooting by a young man in California at a garlic festival. He shot 18 people, killed 3. One of them was a 6-year-old boy. Out west, you've got the 2 fugitives who are still at large, even though they've called in the army, and they're just reading now, they're scaling back the hunt because they can't keep this kind of level of what's the word I'm looking for?
The intensity.
The intensity of the search. That's taking too many resources, right? Because the military only has so much time for this, and the police only have so much time for this, because they have other things they have to do. And I don't mean to sound callous, but the bottom line is you run out of money and time for this kind of stuff. That's part of the reason why they want to catch them right away. And these guys are really good at evading capture in the wilderness. Now, having said that, just as an aside, they might as well be in jail. Yes, they get to run around, but they can't go into town. They can't go to the store. They can't go to the movies. They can't do anything. They can't go get money out of the bank, because as soon as they do anything like that, they get caught. So they might as well be in jail. However, so you've got that scenario, and then you've got the situation in Markham, where the young man walked in. He had flunked out of university a year before the event and felt so much like a loser that rather than admit to his family they had a loser for a son, he shot them all to spare them that humiliation.
Yeah, my understanding is that he actually didn't tell them that he had dropped out.
No, that's right.
It was time for him to graduate, and he hasn't been going for more than a year.
That's right. He would go hang out at the mall.
Right.
So anyway, so the question I was asking myself is why? Because these are all young men about the same age. Now, there's two reasons I came up with, and they are, look, this is like a multifaceted diamond. There's many different things that go into these kind of circumstances, and that's why I started with the caveat of saying, I am no clinical psychologist. I'm just a husband and a father who's raised 8 of his own kids. And look, there's all kinds of reasons that we may never understand why this happened, but I think there's two that we can draw, two conclusions that you can draw, or at least talk about, that may have contributed to the situation. The first one is the attack on fatherhood. Fatherhood in our culture isn't even second fiddle. I'm not even sure that fatherhood is in the orchestra. It's been so gutted, maligned, and attacked that there's not much. Like, you ask yourself, if I'm a 20-year-old man, what do I want to be a father for? Why do I want that kind of abuse? You know, because dads play a very important role in the rearing of their children. It's not the same as mom does. Okay, mom has a completely different role within the family than the husband does. And of the families that I know of who produce, relatively speaking, well-balanced children, it's because mom and dad each accept their role and work as a team, and their whole game plan is to produce well-balanced, fundamentally sound young adults to step out into the world and make their mark in the world and go out and be their own people, be their own, boy or girl doesn't matter. So you've got this where husbands and fathers have taken a beating in our culture for 30 or 40 years. And now we're seeing the consequences. At least in my opinion, these are some of the consequences. Because, look, one of the things, if you feel like a loser, I'm talking about the kid in Markham, I don't know his personal circumstance. I don't know what his relationship with his father he had, if he had a father, any of that. But a young boy, and I still think about the times when I got approval from my dad for doing right and when I got my butt handed to me for doing things wrong. Okay? Dad was not fuzzy, feel-good, huggy, cuddly, buddy kind of guy. He was the kind of guy who a simple word of approval would carry you farther than a whole 2 years of school where the teacher said you're a good kid. It's different than any other kind of approval, because your father is somebody who you look to for leadership and guidance. So that's been trashed. So who do these kids have to look to? And it's part of the Peterson phenomenon. Why do so many young men specifically turn to a guy like Peterson who, pardon my language, but kicks him in the ass and said, go make your bed and then go out and make yourself a market, be a man, grow up and be a man and take your place in the world? It's because they're not getting it anywhere else and they crave it. They want that leadership. And the other thing, and I'll let you in on this in a second, the other thing is feminization. Because not only have you got fatherhood being gutted, all right, you have a situation where now it's not just the same thing as, how do I put it? You have everything, boys and girls are the same. You've got all these other things going on that the line between male and female has been blurred. Masculinity is being downplayed, and gender equality is now the rage. And yet, inside, everybody knows that's wrong, even if they won't admit it. They know that that's not true. And I don't care whether your name is Jenner or whether your name is Smith. Okay, people know there's only two genders and that anything else is wrong. So you've got this witch's brew and all the other influences that are going on are contributing to what now let me finish up by saying by no means am I saying every young man does this. These are the radical, very rare exceptions. But is it that hard to see how people can fall into that trap? Is it really that hard to say, okay, this may have played a role, where it's like the tip of the iceberg, right? The very peak of the mountain. There's all kinds of stuff beneath that. And not everybody makes the tip of the mountain, thank God, in this case. But there's got to be some kind of connection there somewhere between the lack of the role of a father in the family and the feminization of boys.
Okay, so I think you're overcomplicating it, Nick. I think you're
Me
hitting on all of the
overcomplicating
points.
things?
No, I think that all of the points that you've raised are valid points, except I'm going to take issue with one thing, and that is the idea of gender equality and that boys and girls are the same, males and females are the same. You know, that was something that when we were in grade school, they were hammering into us. There's no difference between boys and girls.
Right.
It used to be that, I mean, when we were being raised in our parents' generation and previous generations, there was clearly a difference. Now, that doesn't mean that one was superior to the other, and it doesn't mean that one had only one role to play and the other had only one role to play. Although, you know, in reality, socialized the way that society was organized, that generally was the way it worked out. But there was no biological reason for it. But we were told when we were growing up that was totally wrong, that there was no difference between the two genders. Girls could be tomboys, okay, and boys could play with dolls, and it didn't mean anything. But now that's all been turned upside down. It's all on its head now, where we're being told now that if you are born as a boy, that if you play with dolls, that actually means that you're secretly, deep down inside, really a girl. And conversely, if you're a girl and you happen to be curious about male genitalia and express that to your parents, that's an indication, according to some child psychologists, that really inside you're a repressed male. And so we're being taught now that all of these extraneous things actually do make a difference. And that's completely different. So on that, I take a little bit of issue with you. But on everything else, I think you're spot on. The only comment I have to it, the only thing I would add to it is I think that you're overcomplicating it. I think it comes down to one simple thing, and that is that nobody's raising these children. They're abandoned. They're abandoned to social media, the mall, hanging out with their friends. There's nobody that's setting boundaries. There's nobody's teaching. And I think this affects males more than it affects females. But I think you still have the problem with females. But there's nobody in the family that's actually teaching boys how to be men, how to be good husbands, how to be good fathers. And part of that is teaching, proactive teaching, and part of that is modeling.
Example.
Okay, setting a good example. And I think that that's what's missing. And I think that, you know, if you look at it from sort of that global sense, that really kind of incorporates everything that you've suggested. It touches pretty much on everything.
Well, I think, let me go back to your idea about boys playing with dolls and girls playing with trucks and tomboys and that kind of thing. I agree with you. When I was in school, if a girl wanted to, be a tomboy, tomboys have been with us forever. And there are certain times in a boy's life when they're experimenting and they're playing around where they might do things that you would look at them and say, well, that's a kind of girly thing to do. But it's a phase, and everybody knew it. And the girls, sometimes some girls would go on and have a lot of things that boys do that they enjoy, but the feminine side of them eventually blossomed. And there was, the tomboy part was still there, but it was softened by the feminine side. With boys, they would grow through this phase, and they would end up being having a more tender side, perhaps, but they're no less male. So I agree. I understand what you mean by that. And all I'm saying is that when you take father out of the house, either for economic or who cares why, you have a huge hole to fill.
Right. And I agree with you. Again, if I'm going to take issue, if I'm going to quibble, it's going to be on this point, Nick. I think it's important to understand that we're not just talking about broken families here. We're not just talking about separated parents and divorced parents where the father may be out of the equation, if not entirely, then substantially. But we're actually talking about intact families where the parents are not engaged with the children.
Well, that's as bad as a family torn apart.
This is my point exactly. So again, for me, the problem isn't that fathers are not in the equation. That is a problem in and of itself. But I think that it's deeper than that. I think that we have, in society today, more and more, we just have parents who are abdicating their responsibility to be parents. And they want to be friends with their children. They want their children to be friends with them. They want to be on an equal footing. And I just think that's wrong. I think that parents have to be parents, and otherwise they're not raising their children.
Well, I think just as a last word, because I know we got to move on to the next segment, I don't think a lot of these parents know how. They come from 1 and 2 children families, and with families more than 3 or 4, and I don't mean everybody has to have 8 kids like my wife and I did.
Right.
But they never learn how to be parents before they need to be.
Well, and I think that that's a very important point to make, a very significant observation, Nick. It's not a new thing. This is now multi-generational, and you have parents who have no idea how to be parents, who have been raised by parents now who had no idea how to be parents. So it's a big problem. I don't know what the solution is to it, but I think that you're right in illustrating it or in bringing it up.
All right. Round 1 in the books.
Okay, so for my first topic tonight, Nick, I was spending some time, as I do on a daily basis, going through news feeds, etc., and I came across this really interesting story about. He's laughing already because it's tragic and it's funny at the same time, if that's possible. Okay, an Egyptian scholar, an Egyptian Hebrew scholar. Now, Hebrew scholar, not being that he's Jewish or that he's Hebrew or whatever, but he's a scholar in Hebrew literature, Hebrew language. I don't know. Anyway, he's an Egyptian scholar teaching at King Saud University in Saudi Arabia. And he was interviewed on Egyptian television recently. And this fellow's name, by the way, is Fuad Abdel Walid. Wahid, not Walid, Wahid. So, as I said, he's a professor at this Saudi university, and he's being featured on a television show recently, being broadcast in Egypt. And they're talking about, I guess what is his favorite topic, Jews. After all, he's a quote-unquote
authority on the topic.
He's a scholar. He's a Hebrew scholar. And what does he come up with? He comes up with this thing that apparently Jews, and not all Jews, but extremist Jews, okay, use human blood in the making of matzah at Passover time. Now, for those of you who don't know what matzah is, that's the unleavened bread that Jews eat for the 1 week, the festival of Passover. And I don't want to get into the history of why we do it, but Jews eat unleavened bread. Now, it could be worse. It could be all Jews use human blood to make matzah, according to this fellow. Okay, but he's saying no, it's not all Jews. It's just those extremist ones who might otherwise be called ultra orthodox. Okay, so now he and his interlocutor are having a discussion around it, and what do they agree on? They don't have a discussion about the details of all of this stuff. Okay, what they agree on is that, but apparently, eating human blood or ingesting human blood is not the particularly most healthy thing to do. So that's what they come up with. And, I'm laughing about it because it is terribly funny on a certain level. And on another level, it's deeply disturbing. And, it just reminds me, Nick, a few years ago, when I read this, I'd forgotten about this, and it just brought it up again. But more than a few years ago, I think it's probably a decade or so ago, on Lebanese television, there was an actual TV series, and the theme of the series was that, I think it was a mini-series, it was set in the Yehuda and Shomron, the quote-unquote occupied territories,
Right.
the Palestinian area of the occupied territories, and the idea was that these Jewish settlers were kidnapping Palestinian children to harvest their eyes in order to transplant them into blind Jewish children's eyes so that the Jewish children could see. And this was on national state television in Lebanon.
I guess they don't know that transplanting of eyes has not been accomplished yet.
Well, look, don't
cloud the issue with
They're
fact.
trying,
Okay,
okay? Let's give them credit where it's due, okay? They're trying. It was an interesting concept. But getting back to this other fellow, okay, this professor, is there anybody out there that actually believes this bunk? I mean, seriously. I mean, and the tragedy is there probably are. There probably are a minority. I don't think that Egyptians all think this way. I don't think that Muslims all think this way. I don't think Arabs all think this way. I don't think that the overwhelming majority think this way. But I do think that there's enough of a small minority that think this way that makes it a very disturbing thing to do. Now, here's the question that I have. Is this fellow going to be fired? I mean, really.
Fired? He'll probably get a raise.
I don't know.
What I find funny about this is also the same culture, the one who's talking about how unhealthy it is to consume human blood. And whether that's true or not, it's beside the point. This is also the same culture that says drinking camel urine is good for you. Now, I'm sorry. How do you square that? I mean, come on. This is medieval thinking. And it reminds me of the scene from the Monty Python movie, Search for the Holy Grail, where the king and one of his knights is riding along. And I'm probably going to butcher the quote, but the knight is explaining to him how the earth and its gravity are affected or controlled by a sheep's bladder. And the king says, this new learning fascinates me. Right out of the, 1300s. That's what we're listening to, is this kind of nonsense. Because how can you, on one hand, say that, hey, listen, if you got a health problem, knock back a quart of camel urine. That'll cure you. That'll fix what ails you. And then turn around and say, oh, by the way, drinking human blood is not necessarily a good idea and isn't healthy.
Now,
if I had to pick between the two, guess which one I'm picking?
This professor Wahid was asked where he thinks this blood comes from.
Oh, yeah.
And his answer, and I'm quoting, of course I'm quoting in English because I don't speak Arabic, by Allah, I don't know where they get the blood from. I believe that it's like a sacrifice by some Jews or some sort of a donation in order to prepare the mixture.
A donation.
I mean, you can see the people lining up. You can see them, with their black coats and hats and side curls and long beards.
With their arms bared.
Okay, lining up at the local blood transfusion or blood donation center like Red Cross in Israel. It's Magen David Adom. And giving that and saying, okay, can I please have that bag of blood? I mean, my goodness gracious. Now, I hope nobody's out there is offended that we're actually laughing at it, because
Well, it's
it
laughable.
is. It's a laughable thing, and you have to laugh at it. But I'd be remiss if I didn't say, Nick, that historically this is known as a blood libel, and historically this kind of thing getting out into the public has led, in the Middle Ages particularly, it has led to pogroms, to riots against Jews in Europe, and so it's in that respect, it's, it has a historical context that's
Right.
not funny, not humorous, and again, as I say, deeply disturbing. But that anyone in the modern age could think this way and not be called out on it. I mean, this is a university professor.
Well,
So listen here. If our listeners want to do something about this, what they should do is they should look up the address of your local Saudi consulate or embassy, whatever country you happen to be listening in, and send them a note, send them a letter saying how terrible this is, that it is a black eye for Saudi Arabia, and that the Saudi government should be doing something. Okay, they should be revoking this person's work permit, send him back to Egypt where he belongs.
well, you and I both know that's not going to happen.
No,
but
of course it's not.
again, I go back to this idea that it's just medieval thinking, and just it's so outrageous. Like there are so many more important things in the world to worry about. This is just, on its face, it's ridiculous.
Of course.
So why? I guess when you got nothing better to do, and anyway, all right. That's,
Well, I don't know. Maybe it's maybe it's climate change. I mean, they blame everything else on.
Well,
climate
you know
change.
what?
I don't
Obviously, this is a symptom of a guy who spent at least too much time in the sun.
No, it's regrettably I don't agree with that. It's not mainstream, but it's more prevalent than I think we would like to admit.
Oh,
This
perhaps.
kind of thing.
But it's just like the idea is just plain. It's just plain crazy.
Now, should this person be a parent?
Let's hope he's not.
Well, I don't know, but I'd be surprised if he wasn't. Can
So
you
would I.
imagine a father? Like, what does the son or daughter think of a father that says this kind of stuff?
Well,
assuming that, of course, the kids are semi-educated and
well,
better educated than the father
the
is.
question is, do they believe their father? And most kids, depending on the age, like if they're teenagers, if they're anything like Western teenagers, are going to be going, yeah, sure, Dad, whatever. They're not going to believe it. Like there's not only the traditional act of rebellion when you're in your middle teenage years, that's going to kick in. On the other side of the coin, if they're 6 or 8, and they don't doubt a word their father says, no matter how outrageous, then yeah, they're probably going to believe it. And if he entrenches it well enough, they'll carry it through until a lot of them might even carry it through their whole lives and never allow it to be uprooted.
Now, here's an interesting question. I don't want to get into too much on this, and maybe not at all, but I'm going to throw it out there, Nick. But what would have happened? How would you have handled it if your father or one of your parents, started spouting off this way? It's an interesting question. I don't know how I would have handled it. Obviously, I would have handled it. It wouldn't have happened, but
yeah, that's the problem I have too. It's so outrageous and my father was such a practical man that he never would have brought that home. He'd have just laughed it off and said, "You're crazy." But at the same time, who knows? You don't know what goes on behind people's closed doors. So, you know what? This is just the kind of nonsense that you want to talk about promoting hatred and bigotry. Because if you're 6 or 8 or 10 and you believe this, how are you going to feel about the people who do it or who are accused of doing it?
well, this is the problem, of course.
Yeah, that's my point.
Yeah, it's a terrible situation. Anyway, that's the end of round 2, and that means that we are at the bottom of the hour, which of course means that we're going to go for a break. So hang on, we'll be back in a few minutes here in
Don't
the
go
combat
anywhere.
zone.
All right, welcome back to the Combat Zone, folks. It's been an interesting first half hour, and if you thought it was good, if the first half hour was good, man, are we going to have some fun and do a little back and forth in the second hour. Now, in the next segment, the next 15 minutes, I want to cover a topic that, while has local roots here in the city of Ottawa, it has general application across the board. Just let me give you an example of, we have recently here in Ottawa put in the ground a 13-year-old boy who is about a week or two was killed while riding his bike at 5 o'clock in the afternoon along with heavy traffic, he and his two buddies. And they behaved unexpectedly. The driver's not going to be charged, which is, I mean, the whole thing's just a tragedy. I'm not trying to make light of it, but it wasn't the driver's fault. The kid just moved unexpectedly, and big eats little. He just hit the young man and killed him. So he's going to have to live with that for the rest of his life. And my attitude at the time, which is the same as it is now, is get bikes and cars and buses away from each other. Take them out of the downtown core. Take them off the busy streets. Understand bicycles are for recreation. And that got me to thinking, as I'm driving up Merivale Road here, which is a very busy thoroughfare in the city of Ottawa. There's a young woman, probably in her mid-20s. She's got her helmet on. She's in her bike clothing. She's got a saddlebag over the rear bike. And going up Merivale Road, there is no bike lane. And she's riding within 2 inches of the curb. Okay, that in and of itself is all right. But she's kind of wobbly because we're not moving that fast. And I'm thinking to myself, if she wobbles the wrong way and that front wheel catches that curb, it's going to dump her right in front of me. So I'm driving my car, watching her and paying attention to the traffic. And it occurred to me, say, look, I go back to the argument about it's time to separate bikes and cars and admit that these two things should never meet. They should never be on the same surface at the same time. Certainly not as a method of transportation. Recreation, if you want to go off on a bike path, knock yourself out. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a bike. But it occurred to me that I think we've carried this idea too far. Joseph was telling me earlier about a story where the Ontario Provincial Police are now want to mount side-mounted cameras on their cruisers to catch distracted drivers who are using cell phones. Now, in and of itself, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not saying that people should use cell phones. When I'm driving, I use a Bluetooth. I put it in my ear, and through voice command, I can do all the functions of the phone by using my Bluetooth. Cars are wired
when it's working.
Yeah, when it's working. Technology is great. And if it isn't, I still don't pick the phone up. If I have to make a phone call, I'll find a parking lot, pull in there, and make the phone call. Because I do not have a death wish, I have a life wish. I don't want to hurt anybody, and I don't want to get hurt myself. So what came to mind is I contrasted life today with what used to go on in the 70s when I was a teenager growing up. There are many times I remember somebody say, hey, let's go to Joe's Convenience or Joe's Variety, and we'll grab a bag of chips and a bottle of pop. So half a dozen of us or a dozen of us would jump in the back of this half-ton pickup truck, go roaring down the highway, about a mile down the road to Joe's. We'd all jump out, go in, get what we wanted, and jump back in and drive home again. Nobody wore helmets. There were no seat belts. We weren't even in the cab of the truck. We were in the box. Now, do I condone that? No. But it was a different mindset. Did people get hurt doing that? Absolutely. But I think what we've done is we have taken safety to such an extreme, and we don't even apply it across the board evenly. For some reason, we just don't want to do that. And I can give you some examples of that as we go on. But right now, you've got kids, they cannot go ride with their bicycles without their helmets. It's against the law. Okay, in many places, it's against the law, where the police will actually take your son or daughter's bike, in other words, your property, because you're probably the one that paid for it, because your son or daughter wasn't wearing a helmet. So safety trumps private property. Okay, now, a lot of people say, well, yeah, that makes sense. And again, it's individually, none of these things are necessarily bad. But when you start layering them on one after the other, okay, when we went skating when I was a kid, you slapped your skates on, you grabbed your stick, and out onto the rink you went. A lot of guys, some guys would wear helmets, some guys wouldn't, because in those days, in the 1970s, none of the NHLers wore helmets. The only one I can think of was Stan Mikita. He was the first one to wear a helmet. And Jacques Plante, we all know, wore the first goalie mask. But the point is, safety was more of a personal responsibility than it was the responsibility of the state. And somehow we survived. The vast majority of us got through those years and went on to be very productive members of society. Today, you cannot move. Everything costs money. Like when you have these rear-mounted cameras on your car so that you don't run into something because you don't want to turn your head and look over your shoulder when you're backing up. And some cars, I will admit, are hard to see over the trunk lid because of the way cars are designed. If you wanted that feature, I'm not against you buying it, but they're standard equipment. You were making this point earlier today. And it's just, I'm thinking that we have gone so far down this road and lost so much personal freedom because of it that I don't think I think we've gone too far is what I'm trying to say. Now, what would I change? I don't know. But I know that I would put a little more responsibility on the individual and a little less on the state.
Well, I tell you what I would change. The very first thing that I would change, Nick, if I had the power, I would do away with dates of expiry for child seats in cars.
Yeah, you know what? Yes, absolutely.
I understand seat belts. I understand child seats. I understand placing the child seat in the back as opposed to the front with airbags because you have these airbags, right?
Yep.
So that's a concern. I understand having the child face the back as opposed to facing the front until the child is a certain age. I understand all of that stuff. Some people might think it's a little overboard. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I understand all of it. What I cannot understand, the bridge too far for me, is expiration date for the child seat. You know, it's tough enough making ends meet as a young family with young children. We were talking about this today. Now, you have to pay for this stuff. And it's not cheap. And it's particularly not cheap because it's mandated by the government. It's compulsory.
That's right.
And things that are compulsory are
expensive.
more expensive because you have no choice. There's no competition. You can't walk away from it. Here's an interesting, also, you know, while I'm thinking, it just popped into my mind. I was driving in a parking lot today, and I've been hearing a commercial on the radio over and over and over again. I was listening to some talk radio in the United States on my phone. I have an app that I can download for conservative talk radio. So sometimes there I just knocked my phone off the table here. Anyway, so this ad has been playing several times, and it's by a manufacturer of an e-cigarette. And what are they talking about? They're talking about how e-cigarettes, number one, they've had, to this particular manufacturer, used to have flavored e-cigarettes for vaping, and they discovered that kids were buying these things because they liked the flavor. So they did away with the flavor, and then they lobbied the government to ensure that you had to be 21 years old to buy this. Now, to buy the product, period. Now, the reason I'm saying this is vaping as opposed to smoking cigarettes, I don't know the science behind it, so I'm not going to offer a comment. I'm not suggesting that they shouldn't be taking the steps that they're doing to try to discourage children or prevent children or even young adults from vaping. What I'm saying is that the whole vaping craze was a safety measure. It was a way to get people to be able to enjoy their nicotine addictions in a safe environment. And then we find out that, in fact, it's not only you're indulging a nicotine addiction,
right?
So it's not helping you break the smoking habit per se. It's just that it's not going to make you quite as sick. But in the rush to do that, bang, you're helping children. get addicted to the nicotine without the side effects of the other smoking. But again, these are just examples of the best of intentions going wrong and causing more problems than they're saving. I mean, really, do you really need an indicator, a flashing light, and a beep on your side mirror in your car when you're driving down the freeway and you want to change lanes? You signal and you
Shoulder
check. It's not a hard concept. You look in the mirror, you shoulder check. How could you possibly have an accident that way?
Well,
But now people aren't doing that because they're relying on the technology to tell them that there's a car beside them. And of course, when the technology fails, as inevitably it will, you end up not checking properly.
because you don't have the habit anymore.
You don't have the habit, so you're not going to check. You're going to have an accident.
Well, these kind of things, look, the other aspect of this, as you pointed out, is the cost. Like when I was talking about these little backup cameras, if you wanted one, okay, and it was voluntary, then let the salesman sell you on its merits. And you can buy it or leave it behind. But they come bundled in. Like if you go into any car manufacturer and there's a package, a power package, right? Powered windows, doors, locks, seats, all that stuff. And you get GPS location, and you get automatic rear view mirrors, and you get these warning lights on your side mirrors and backup lights. You don't have the ability to tailor that to what you actually want. Like, I can understand the need for somebody wanting a power seat, because we're not all built the same. And a lot of times you might lend your car to somebody, and the way they sit in a car is different than the way that you would sit in a car. So of course you want to be able to adjust it.
Why is CNN so prevalent on cable packages but not Fox News?
Because without that, they just go up in smoke.
Do you know that CNN now has lower ratings than the House and Garden?
House and
House and Garden channel? Yeah,
Well, it's more House and Garden's more entertaining,
apparently it is.
and it's also based a lot more on fact. Anyway, but just kind of get back to this idea about safety. I think we've carried this too far. I don't know how to walk it back, but I do know that if we keep going down this track, we literally will be wrapped in bubble pack. And I frankly have no interest in that. Life is full of risks, and that means from the moment you get up in the morning, from the day you're born to the day you die, there's always a risk. No one knows how long they have. So rather than spend every moment worried about every shadow that crosses your path, get out and live and enjoy what time you do have.
And whatever you do, climb a tree, and if you have kids, make sure that you find some trees for them to climb to.
And if you can't find them, bring them out to my place. I got thousands of them.
Yes, he does.
All right. The last round goes to Joseph.
Already? You're already awarding the last round to me?
No, well, I'm saying it's your turn.
I know. I knew what you were saying, Nick.
Yeah, I know you did.
I got it. Stop playing with that lighter, Nick. It's not safe. Okay. All right. So again, my daily exercise in checking out news feeds. So apparently, and this is a CBC News story that was focusing on a family that was reunited with its pet python in Toronto. So the headline is "Family Reunited with Python Pulled from Toronto Sewer." And what's the rest of the headline? This family discovers it's an imposter. So, thank you very much, Nick.
You're
Nick's
welcome.
pouring me a drink of
drink.
something to drink.
That's right. It's a liquid.
Right. L'chaim, right?
That's right.
Okay. So anyway, there's this family in Toronto, and they lost their 11-month-old ball python. And they thought it had been found because somebody found a python in a sewer in the city's East End on Tuesday. Apparently, not Tuesday, today's the 31st, so that would have been yesterday, the 30th, so July 30th. So this python has been missing for more than a month. It went missing sometime in June. And they discovered this python, and they returned it to the family. And they were all excited until the python started to behave differently from what they recollected its proper behavior should be. So the son, 18-year-old son, who was the fellow, my understanding, that actually purchased the python, pulled out some pictures, some photographs that he had taken, and they looked closely and they realized that this isn't their python. So apparently their python is still on the loose, and this python belongs to somebody else who lost their python. And after going into this even a little bit further, they discovered that there are a number of pythons missing in the city of Toronto. So Nick, what do you think they did?
Well,
and I think this is brilliant. I think this is...
They went down to the council chambers of City Hall and wanted them back.
No.
Oh.
No. They started a Facebook page. And the Facebook page, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody should go to it. This is not, I'm not making this up, and everybody should go to it. And I think that everybody should, become friends or like or whatever it is what you do with Facebook, okay? The Facebook is Missing Pythons of Toronto. And just so that you're clear, Python is spelled Pythons. So that's Missing Pythons of Toronto. Now we're laughing at this, okay? Because it really does beg the question. Really, how many pythons are there in Toronto? And how many of these pythons are missing? I mean, how many of these pythons are living in the sewers of the city of Toronto? President Trump made comments about Baltimore being rat infested recently.
And everybody lost the gasket.
That's right. Everybody's blowing at their top about it. They're calling him a racist, etc. I don't know why. So, Americans, they can get kind of
they're not the only ones.
The Democrats down there.
That's a good. I like that.
Okay. Well, how about Toronto being python infested? Because that's what it. Well, maybe infested is too strong a word. Okay, but it's such a curious thing. Anyway, so now Nick, we started looking into this because, it's actually troubling on a certain level that there would be so many pythons and apparently a number of them actually missing. How do you lose a python? I lost my python. I misplaced my python. But there's a serious... But there's a serious side to this, Nick. And the serious side is that these snakes are dangerous. They kill.
They are.
And why don't you fill us in a little bit on what you were
Well, there
able
was
to
a
discover.
story that began in 2013, and it's out of Campbellton, New Brunswick. And somebody had an African rock boa, and two young lads were having a sleepover, a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, and this snake got loose, was in the apartment above them, came down through a dryer vent, and killed them both, strangled them, and was was very busy trying to eat them because a good size snake, a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old child is nothing but a nice light snack. And I laugh at this situation because it's so outrageous, but on the other hand, as Joseph is quite right to point out, there's nothing really funny about it. These kids, what a horrific way to go, to be strangled by a snake. The coroner's report talked about how it had them around the neck and strangled them, and their heads were covered with bite marks as the snake tried to get its mouth over their head to swallow them. And what I guess what it means to me, what the lesson I take away from this, and I talked about this on a previous show, is how completely clueless a lot of people are about the consequences of the decisions they make around wildlife. Like we laughed about the sheep and the ram, the male sheep,
right,
going after the woman. It was funny because he can't really hurt you. He can knock you down, but and you might get hurt that way. But he's not going to kill you.
And last week we were talking about the bison and how they had
precisely. Now bison's again a different kind of animal. But
sure, but
snake.
You pull over on the side of the road. get out and mingle
You have
with the
to actually
bison.
make a stupid choice.
Right. It's not
These
like
kids didn't do anything wrong.
No, I understand.
So I think that people need to really sit down if they want a pet. Like my attitude is about pets. First of all, they're never to be considered humans. And you were talking about somebody who had funerals for their pet dog and just it was way over the top. But at the same time, people need to understand that animals are animals and people are people, and there the twain shall meet. Humans are always more important than animals. If I had to choose between rescuing my mortal enemy from one end of my house when it's on fire or my dog Willie, as much as I love my dog, I'm still going to save the human being because the human being has an intrinsic value the dog does not. I can get another dog, but you are irreplaceable. So, and when I said you, I wasn't looking at Joseph specifically. That was a general royal you.
Although I am irreplaceable.
Yes, all of us are. So people have this just completely out of touch sense what animals are. And I've told the story before about the snapping turtle and the two young girls and all this stuff. But what kind of person do you have to be to want a snake in the first place? I mean, look, I get the machismo that goes with having a pit bull or some big strong dog or something like that. You know, some people like that expression of aggressiveness. Okay, and this dog is just a manifestation of that. So the answer, in my mind, to having animals like this is to have if the animal bites or injures, because not every animal bites. I'm thinking let's use dogs as an example. Take the pit bull ban. If the dog is attacks in an unprovoked attack and injures injures a human being, that dog dies. No question, no jail time, no appeals. Cop shows up, looks at the evidence. If he decides that the dog has bitten somebody, boom, dog's dead. End of story. And that would apply to any kind of pet. So it doesn't matter. You've got the freedom to own any pet you want. But you have to be responsible for it, because if you're not, it's going to cost you your pet's life and the lawsuit that's going to follow afterwards by the people that animal attacked.
Now, there's something that I have to tell you I don't understand, Nick. A few years back, I remember there was a case in the city of Ottawa where a woman had a pet pot-bellied pig.
Yep.
Now, a pot-bellied pig is not going to harm anybody. They're not domesticated, but they're not aggressive.
No.
They're not going to maul anybody. They're not going to attack anybody. Okay? It's just an exotic pet. I don't know why anyone would want to have a pig.
Well,
but that's their business, okay? But pot-bellied pigs are not allowed in the city of Ottawa. And so there was a whole kerfuffle around this at the time because she didn't want to get rid of her pot-bellied pig.
Right.
But the city of Ottawa was saying, no, you must get rid of your pot-bellied pig. And so eventually, I assume, she did get rid of her pot-bellied pig. And there are other animals. I mean, look, the truth is, if I want to have chickens out in my backyard, I can't have chickens. I can't raise chickens in my backyard. Okay? In the city of Ottawa.
Is that a city bylaw or because you live
No,
in
it's a city bylaw.
Okay. So it's
but
not a condo.
I live in the urban part of the city of Ottawa.
Right.
So it's different in the rural part. The city of Ottawa is ladies and gentlemen, is very large geographically. It's extremely large geographically, and it has an urban area and it has a significant rural area. So there are actually farms in the city of Ottawa. And if you live in the rural part of the city of Ottawa, you of course can do exactly that. You can have livestock. But in the urban areas, you're not. So I guess what I'm saying is, or what I'm driving at here, Nick, is I don't get why you can have no pot-bellied pig, no chickens, no turkeys, but you can have a python as a pet. I don't get that.
No, if you see, again, this is the inconsistency. That's why I like this idea of you can have any pet you want, but if it gets out of hand, if it does damage, then it's going to pay, and so are you. So that way it forces owners to be responsible. Now, I was thinking more of aggressive kinds of animals, but if, as an example, we have a standing rule in the country. If somebody from the city moves to the country, we have a neighbor who runs a bed and breakfast, and they're wonderful people. But when they first moved out, they called my neighbor and said, "Can you get rid of your rooster? He crows at 4 and 5 in the morning, and it's waking up our guests." My neighbor, the one who took the phone call, just hung up on her, because the rule is if the rooster was here first, you got to learn to live with the rooster, not the other way around. Now that's a practical solution to a problem, and it's unique to the country. But the point is, people need to understand that animals come second, not first. I have seen people spend tens of thousands of dollars on animals trying to stretch out their lives another 6 months because they can't let go of Fluffy.
Okay, well, look, ladies and gentlemen, here's the final advice I have on this subject, okay? Buy a budgie.
We've got 2 of those too.
Forget the python. You don't want a python. And you especially don't want a python if you have a budgie.
Well, one of them's going to win.
Okay, well, that's the end of round 4, and that brings us to the end of our hour. I didn't actually plan on saying it that way, but it just came out.
That brings us to the end of our hour.
Our hour.
Our hour.
Okay. All right, so on to some important information. We continue to grow, ladies and gentlemen. I think last week I mentioned that you could get our podcast on iHeartRadio, iTunes, Google Podcast, Shoutcast, of course on Spreaker. That's Spreaker, not Speaker. So you could get us pretty much on any of your favorite preferred podcast networks. But what you can also do is, and we really love to recommend this to you, you can get our show anytime, download our app at the Android store. So just look us up on the Android, Google Play, the Combat Zone Podcast. You have to look up the Combat Zone Podcast. It's not all one word, but make sure you get all those 4 words in. The Combat Zone Podcast.
I
just want to make sure Nick
is
looking at me with a little bit of a strange look, and I'm thinking, Nick, make sure you got that right. The Combat Zone Podcast on Google Play. Download the app. You'll get notified when there's a new show posted. You can listen to us live on your cell phone. You'll be driving down, and the new LRT will be open in Ottawa soon. You'll be able to listen to us
all 8 stops
at all of the breakdowns.
You're going to need it because there's... Oh, anyway.
Okay.
We'll save that for
and
another
past
show.
episodes, too. Tell your friends and neighbors about us, ladies and gentlemen. Don't forget, you can send us a comment at comments at thecombatzone.ca. That's comments at thecombatzone.ca. And, of course, if you listen to us live at thecombatzone.ca, you get to participate in our comments section in real time. And it's always very active. I think we had somewhere like 50 comments there tonight, although not always on topic, Nick. It's very strange.
Well, they get it. They think they have a mind of their own, our listeners, and they just go off on their own tangents, and it's like we don't have anything to say about it. Can you imagine that?
Although, AJ, I'm with you, AJ. I'd like to have a pet pig, too. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, with that, Nick is saying no pet pigs.
I've had pigs, and believe me, they're a lot smarter than I am.
Okay. That's it for us this week, ladies and gentlemen. God bless. We'll see you next week here in the Combat Zone.